Hello, everybody. Find this, you all hear it?
No, not
No.
It was a little bit of.
It was not a little bit, it was not enough.
Hello. Well, welcome, everybody. We've got two organizations here tonight. The Xerces Valley Watershed Coalition and the Xerces Park Garden Club. So I'm so thrilled to see you all here and representing both groups. And those of you with the Garden Club, if you don't know about the Watershed Coalition, we were the ones who restored the whole watershed after the 2013 flood. We got about nearly $5 million in grant dollars to do that. We're still at it today. We maintain riparian areas, and we also respond to the fires. So we're doing a lot of fire mitigation, reducing the fuel load in our forests. So if you want to go on our website and check it out, it's got an awful lot of grant dollars coming in to do exactly that. We work across boundaries in Xerces. We work with landowners. So check us out. If you're with an HOA, we can help you reduce your fire load, your fuel load. Okay, tonight we've got Steve Armstead. He is with the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. Every time I'm about to say that, I say inveterate, and then and that's an international organization. So I'm going to let Steve tell you all about the organization and what we can do to preserve our invertebrates here. Take it away.
All right, thank you. Well, I'm gonna try to go without the mic, if that's okay, if you can hear me well enough. Usually my voice comes well. I have a problem, is I like to actually talk with my hands, so with a mic, I'm not going to throw it around. I thought safe with you all if I do it this way. And thanks for the introduction. I'm actually excited to be here this evening. My name is Steve Armstead, and I am with the Xerces Society. I'll give you a little bit more background about the Xerces Society, but just briefly about me. Is I've been with the Xerces for just over a year now, so I'm kind of a newbie. But that's exciting because just for Xerces to have a presence in Colorado is something new. You'll see it will cost. It's an international organization, but we just haven't had really a presence in Colorado or that much in the Rocky Mountain states. But a little over a year ago, there was a strong interest to work partner with the city of Boulder and other communities in the Front Range to help build pollinator corridors through many of the communities. And so that's an active program, pollinator conservation, but also working with local communities. It's kind of nature-based plans, working on biodiverse corridors. The person is passionate about, we really wanted to try to have a role in trying to pilot some efforts here and work with a lot of communities. So I stepped into that opportunity. Previous to that, because I'm not a youngster anymore either, because I have a long working career with the city of Boulder and their open space program. So working as a ranger, as a planner, so long background there, but I also have a strong passion for butterflies. That's what I got my master's degree in through CU, University of Colorado, and have been running around with foothills forever looking for butterflies. And so for me, this is kind of my second step into, following my passion after retiring and kind of really re-engaging with something I care deeply about. To be able to do it with an organization like Xerces is pretty spectacular. Well, get a chance to come out and share my enthusiasm with you all. Okay, so tonight what I'd like to talk a little bit about is give you a little background about Xerces. Again, since we haven't had a presence, that there may not be a lot of familiarity with this organization, but we actually have an incredible kind of realm of expertise, information to share. And hopefully some of that can help you with your own individual endeavors to create beautiful and hopefully, thriving spaces around you for not only insects, pollinators, but a lot of other organisms, and maybe for yourself too, but how you can your own spaces, make those connected or partner with others to actually enhance the ability for us to have really thriving spaces around the community or connected to all the incredible natural areas we're actually fortunate to have here all throughout Colorado. So to give you a little background about Xerces, I want to share a little bit more about some of the important types of programs we have, give you a kind of a breadth of what we do and some of the conservation work, and it's a lot of times too that the information is relevant here. Share a little bit about some of the things you can do and how you can be involved. But again, looking at your own spaces, how do you kind of do some gardening or do some things in your own living spaces around you or in your community to actually make that better or successful habitat for pollinators and invertebrates. And then share a little bit about some of the information we have. Some of that's up there on the table, but we have a whole lot more that may help you. And then hopefully we'll have some time for questions as well. So that's kind of the adventure we're going to pursue here tonight. So Xerces, it's an odd name. And I just actually put this together tonight. I hadn't thought about it. So the name actually comes from a small little blue butterfly, the Xerces blue, that went extinct, unfortunately, in the San Francisco Bay Area back in, last time it was seen was 1943. So about a little over 50 years ago, a well-known author and lepidopterist, butterfly expert, Bob Pyle, decided, you know what, it's important we start as experts in the field doing more to try to collect information, share information, and partner with whoever we can to kind of pay attention to the little critters. Butterflies was their main focus, but that's just any sort of invertebrate. To hopefully, find ways that we can help other little creatures not, have the same path of fate that the Xerces blue had. So he started an organization and decided to call it Xerces after the name of this little butterfly. And I just happened to have blue on tonight. I didn't think about that, but that's one of my favorite colors. They actually fits pretty well too. The other kind of just a quick aside is, one of the things I love is that Bob Pyle is actually a Colorado native. So he grew up in Denver. If you've never read any of his books, you may want to look it up. He's written about Denver and some of his childhood, and actually has some fiction that deals with Mount Meeker just down the road. But he's also, within any of that, or kind of infused with the ideas that a lot of times the Xerces Society itself kind of takes is that we have to engage people, we have to engage science, and be able to actually make a meaningful difference on the ground. So Xerces Society kind of has moved forward over those 50 years to grow and kind of develop and expand kind of things. Went from looking primarily at butterflies now to any sort of invertebrate, even including mussels, snails, you name it. It doesn't have a backbone. It ideally falls within kind of the realm of what we're trying to look after. Although pollinators, given their importance, are but we also do a lot of work in other broader conservation efforts, in advocacy, in research, and also a lot, and also education. And one of the reasons I'm here this evening with you. But the bottom line is
do you mind using the mic?
No,
The
I can
online
do that.
people are just having a little trouble.
I can do that.
Thank you.
Okay, is this?
I think you have to talk right into it.
We'll make sure.
Yeah.
Okay, there it is. Now we got it. All right, okay. Want to make sure everybody's included. So anyways, so we have these various programs, but it really doesn't make a difference unless those programs are actually making also a difference on the ground. So what we do is trying to make sure, we are doing things that help pollinators, help all invertebrates, both within ways that we can create habitat or protect habitat for them. But bottom line is they're not going to survive unless they have the natural systems around them that they depend upon. And so we need to make sure, they have those resources. And that can be making sure our natural areas that we have are well protected and have the right elements, but also, and luckily with invertebrates, and we'll touch on base more on this, it's even small things, even an individual plant that you might plant can make a difference. So, their habitat has a real wide spectrum of what they require. Really key and important to invertebrates is pesticides. So we also are active about learning about and trying to do work that helps to reduce the presence of pesticide in and around, our agricultural areas, our urban areas, you name it. You know, there are at times that you have to use them, but how do we apply good knowledge to minimize that and help to, you know, reduce the risk of pesticides and species protection? So, you know, we can touch again based on this even more, that invertebrates are facing a lot of challenges. And specifically, there are some specialists or some that only occur in small little areas. So knowing about that and then knowing what we can do to protect them is incredibly important. And then, you know, the only way you really know is to do work, to research, to go out, explore, and find. So these are all aspects of work that we are involved in. And just like it matters to do stuff on the ground, you can't do enough without engaging the power of people. You know, we all magnify our efforts as long as we start connecting people to the efforts on the ground and make a bigger fit. So we have an incredible, you know, team that's focused on outreach and engagement. I'm going to do a lot of that myself. We have abundant volumes of resources available on our website. If you go to xerces.org, you know, if you want a simple brochure, actual books. We have an incredible amount of information that can help you understand invertebrates, understand pollinators, but also understand what you can do. We have a lot of different community science programs that we're directly involved in or partnering with other organizations for. And we do get involved in advocacy and campaigns, because at a community level, that's important to share that these are things we can do collectively that make a big difference. And sometimes on a, you know, state level or even a national level, to try to make changes in policies or promote certain good practices that help pollinators out. So we're engaged in that level as well. As I mentioned, we're, you know, a larger growing organization. We're now about 80 employees. We do kind of have representation across the United States, and actually now we have that in Canada as well. First person now is from the last, which is pretty exciting. You can see me the blue star in the middle. So, you know, I got pretty big region to try to support. Primarily I'm supporting Front Range area, but as we continue to grow, I think it's pretty exciting that we have a number of those different programs I talked about and staff that's kind of working across the United States to be able to help manage these programs. But we also don't do it alone. So we, you know, really benefit from our large membership that we have active in our organization to help learn and help promote. We have a lot of private foundations that help support us, fund some of the work we're doing, although we're primarily funded through our membership. We do a lot of partner work with local, federal, state governments, particularly with the National Resource Conservation Service. So we know that, again, partnering with other organizations, with government entities is incredibly important. We work with farmers, ranchers, because of the amount of lands that are available that have a lot of potential. So all the work we do is, again, needs to be connected with a lot of partners out there. So what does it matter? Why do we care about dealing with invertebrates? And the reality is there's a growing body of evidence that the invertebrates around us are struggling. So there's been a number of different research studies looking at, you know, the abundance or the diversity of pollinators, especially over time, and realizing that what was is no longer what is, that there's less of them or less diversity. And some of them, you know, certainly now are facing extinction or certainly are threats. And so as an example, there's an incredible diversity of, you know, invertebrates across the globe, but the reality is that there's so many, and they can occur in so many different spaces that we only know a tiny little bit about them. And kind of this graph, and frankly, the statement here kind of indicates that, you know, while we've only kind of assessed maybe 1% of the invertebrates for their threatened status, so a very small aspect of trying to assess what's out there, of that little bit we've assessed, there's already kind of clear evidence that over 40% of the species that have been assessed are at some risk of being threatened. So little information already collected saying, you know, kind of warning lights, there's concerns out there. So the number of, you know, butterflies, other organisms are certainly showing indications that they're decreasing in numbers, and that should be something we want to be cautious and be thoughtful around. So just look at bumblebees. You know, luckily here in the United States, it's pretty amazing. We have 57 different species of bumblebee. So again, not a huge number, but something that we can actually go out and do more research around to understand the current presence in status. We'll come back and visit that a little later too. But of those 57, we already know that about a third of them are at some risk of extinction. So not good news, you know, that there's a few generals that are doing okay, but several that are in dire concern. And in fact, 2 now that are on endangered species. So things that we have to be, you know, careful of. Butterflies, another very common group of pollinators. You know, a couple different studies all indicating the same kind of general concerns. That when we have studies around looking at the trends in their populations, most of those trends are in a downward trend. So saying we need to be concerned about that. Okay, so news is not necessarily great. We'll talk more about the good things we can do to help that out. But why, again, does this matter? So the insects really have, you know, a role for us. And the answer is they do very important role around us. That they have these relationships with actually helping to turn things that we discard or don't want our waste, you know, the waste around us, and break that down and recycle that back into our system. So they're incredibly important in our nutrient cycle, in our building of soil, and breaking down materials. You know, sure, a lot of our invertebrates can, you know, around us be annoying and pests, especially if you're a gardener, you gotta be careful around them. But on the flip side, they also have an incredible array of predators in the invertebrates that help to keep many of those pests in balance. And a lot of times what happens is we kind of flip the systems. We create a kind of a more unified or unicultural crop and remove all the diversity of other invertebrates from an area because we're worried about our crops. But in fact, we were removing many of the checks and balances. The other predator wasps or ladybird beetles or laceweeds that are there to help prey upon those pests. So they actually offer a lot of free pest control services for our farms, our own gardens, if we do things that help promote that. They're incredible and hugely important food source throughout the whole, you know, web of life. And so you think about a clutch of birds needing over, you know, 2,500 caterpillars to support a chickadee clutch. So that's a lot of insects, a lot of caterpillars to feed, you know, those baby birds. And think about again how many birds are out there requiring, you know, a food source, or let alone something as big as a grizzly bear feeding on some moths. Just thinking about again, and on the Rocky Mountains, you're a fisher person, you know, flies, the aquatic insects, incredibly important for our fishery as well. And fundamentally, they help plants. They have this incredible relationship, and that's key to the pollinators. Plants reproduce. So, and I think that's certainly something that's incredibly important for us. So the reality is that about 85% of the flowering plants are dependent upon pollinators. Most of those pollinators, there are vertebrate pollinators, certainly hummingbirds, bats have a role in that. But the majority of them are actually the little creatures, the invertebrates that are making a difference there. So without these invertebrates, you know, we don't have many of the benefits of both the beauty, but the importance of all the flowering plants around us. Just a key example of that is I know one of the plants that I love to see late spring, early summer is golden banner when it's out. You know, it kind of filled in some of our valleys here. Yet that plant itself, you know, it's a kind of a big, heavy flower to it. It needs a very hefty, strong bee to be able to pollinate it. Usually bumblebees are the primary pollinators, but there are a couple other bees that are pretty soft, large. They can kind of force their way into the petals part to get into the pollen and the nectar. So you think about that relationship. I love golden banner, but and I drew up a slide, bumblebees are struggling a little bit. We lose the bumblebees. What happens to golden banner out in our system? It's a pretty tight relationship with having those, you know, select a few powerful bees, taking kind of groups to get in there. Maybe correct that. There are some bees that again, most of them are females, so they're brunets. Okay, so, but that also kind of comes back to us in terms of, you know, flowering plants are something we're incredibly dependent upon ourselves. I think about it every time I wake up in the morning and grab my cup of coffee. You know, I'm thinking those bees and the butterflies and everything else that's pollinating the cocoa plants for, you know, or the coffee plants. But also when I get my chocolate bar snack late in the afternoon, that's cocoa, those are things that are pollinated, thanks to insects. This is kind of an exciting piece of work, just as an example of how impactful, when we go to a grocery store into the produce section, what we rely on for pollinators to provide food for us. So the picture on the left here shows basically an example of Whole Foods, and they were participant in this work is, you go in and see their produce stand, and then if you remove everything in that produce stand that was pollinated by invertebrates, you get what results in the picture to the right. So I'd much rather go shopping where I know there's pollinators doing their work than for those plants, which there's still a couple of good ones in there, but not the diversity, not the benefit of having the diversity of what's available there to our pollinators. And so when I'm talking about pollinators, there's a lot of different pollinators, but the primary groups that we should be thinking about are, of course, butterflies, flies, which are often underappreciated but should be appreciated more, wasps, moths, beetles, and then of course the bees. So, these are the species where we're kind of generally thinking about pollinators. Keep in mind, those are the species that we're actually hoping oftentimes to protect, although by protecting them, we're actually probably protecting many other invertebrates as well. So we're seeing declines in insects. We're seeing that has a lot of relevance to us. What can we do to help think about this? One of that is just addressing some of the risks that touch base on a few of them. Certainly protecting habitats is important. So part of that flip side is whatever we can do to help reduce habitat loss, because that's a critical concern or risk for invertebrates. Pesticide reduction, we talked about that, trying to reduce a very direct threat upon them. Diseases, non-native, other non-native insects and non-native plants become a significant problem for invertebrates. So addressing diseases can come from, other introduced species. Honeybee actually is an introduced species, even though it has a place, especially when it's adjacent to many natural areas, that can pose a risk potentially from introducing some of the diseases that come with honeybees, or other bees that shift from areas they, maybe native to, but to where they don't belong. That just keeps kind of blocking the potential for diseases to get exposed to our, native population. Climate change is certainly one of the big issues for all confounded with in a lot of different ways, but it has very dire effects for insects, both because it affects the habitat that they're dependent upon, but also them specifically. You think about a bumblebee, it needs some warmth to be able to be active, but it too is very sensitive to big bodied bee to extreme heat temperatures. So when it gets hotter, it certainly affects their ability to be active, to be healthy. And so changing temperatures, changing climate conditions certainly has an effect on many of our invertebrates. So what are we doing to learn more about the ways we and about the places we should have faced with many of our invertebrates? So Xerces, we're pretty active. We've got staff that are engaged with trying to help build information about where are certain species, looking at historic records, going out and exploring. This is where we knew certain butterflies, bees, other invertebrates to occur. Are they still there? Is there a reason to be concerned or not? We have staff going out and looking for butterfly species in the Pacific Northwest. Right now, there's a lot of concern for some of this butterflies down in the Southwest. We've got staff that are out on the ground doing surveys for that. And all this is helping to us just to build a basic knowledge again about what's out there, what do we know they're needing in their habitats to be able to be successful, and then where are those risks for those? We're filling in a lot of knowledge gaps. And then the purpose of that again is to inform conservation. So we can work with many of our partner organizations, do some advocacy that's required with our federal agencies that have a lot of protected land, or with our local governments or individuals who have the ability to provide, the space and resources. So, we've got staff that are out in the field doing a lot of work about that. And that work matters, again, because it can help tell us something about where we need to focus our energies and what we should be concerned about. And And one of the things we're learning is certainly it's very important to know that sometimes there are invertebrates that are kind of have a tight niche. They may be dependent upon a certain kind of area of space, certain habitat, certain regional zone, certain climate conditions, certain topography. But some of the things we're actually learning is even some of the more widespread, maybe general species. We looked at those overall trends being declining, but we need to be maybe more concerned too about some of these generals, because they, even though you see them a lot, they actually may not be doing well themselves. So you think about monarchs, you can kind of talk about that in a little more specific later. So I guess I talk about it now. Some monarchs is kind of an example. There's something that we're all familiar with, but a species that, as we track numbers, it's becoming even greater concern about. From when there used to be an incredible number of monarchs present overwintering sites, the numbers are dropping off significantly. And I mentioned about skippers in the Southwest. There's a lot of endemic skippers that, little tiny butterflies that are, being hard to be able to identify and see compared to where they used to be. So there's high interest that there may be little pockets where certain groups of invertebrates have a higher risk of going extinct. So there's an example again with the monarch. Xerces has been active in doing a lot of monitoring for the West Coast monarchs. So we look at the winter nesting sites and also looking more and more at the summer, grounds too, for where they kind of migrate through, tracking numbers. You can see the graph over in the far right, that since we've been tracking in the late 1990s, there's certainly incredible high numbers when we first started tracking, well over 1 million for winter nesting site. And you can just see the overall trend of the green bars to precipitously drop down. The amazing thing is the blue line on that graph indicates the level of effort. So what it's saying in essence is we are seeing the green kind of drop, and then it certainly has some peaks and valleys, but overall there's kind of, especially in the last 5 or 6 years or so, even though we had a decent winter, the last couple of winters, the recent numbers have been quite drastic in terms of a lot. But our effort has really increased. So it means we're spending a lot more time doing counts and trying to be accurate in what we're assessing. And in spite of that, the numbers keep kind of dropping, which means it's a greater level of concern that the monarchs are really facing some real concerns about their ability to sustain large populations. I mentioned that what some of the work we're doing, partnering with other researchers, they're indicating that some of the species that we thought were pretty common throughout our area are actually also facing some dire risks themselves. And just to bring that home, I think monarchs, you may have them come through, but usually there's something that's more recognized for the western flyway or the eastern flyway. Well, here just in the valley in Colorado, we have the large marble butterfly, one of the white butterflies. If you've seen a cabbage white butterfly or a checker, just kind of the white butterflies that fly around, this is a relative of this. It frequents many of our stream drainages and some of the open meadows along our drainages. Its caterpillar feeds on mustards. So usually, early spring or late spring mustards that will be out. A lot of times you may be able to catch this particular butterfly. Named a marble, you can see kind of the green and gray marbling pattern on the underside of its wings. So you kind of get that flash. There's a couple different marbles. This is the one with the kind of most profuse marbling on it. One of our butterflies, it's not uncommon if you go up for a hike, along a little ravine, you may see it, again, it kind of typically flies up and down the ravine. It sometimes stops and, will perch on a mustard. It's one of the ones I have the hardest time photographing because it doesn't stop all that long, so by the time you get your camera out, everything else, it's often moving and it often leads to more frustration. However, it is one that now, after looking at over 300 species, looking at information that's been available for some long-standing counts through the North American Butterfly Association, they've actually had annual counts in Boulder and Jefferson County foothills that have been tracking this and other butterflies for probably over 40 to 50 years here in Colorado. So we have a good basis of information. That information has kind of been compiled with other similar counts happening all throughout the Western US. And that's work that's been done largely by Dr. Matt Forster out of the University of Nevada, and a lot of collaborators, including some research staff. And they're finding through kind of doing some modeling computers that both what are these counts in terms of the trends of which butterflies are being seen still, and modeling in some of the factors that threaten butterflies, like higher temperatures. How long are they on wing for? When are they on wing for? Their wing size that helps indicate, how strong of a flyer they are. And so different factors, you kind of run that through to say which of these species then, that are all being tracked through these counts are most at risk of, going extinct, or at least, declining to a point we need to be concerned about. And there were several species that kind of jumped up out of that list, and some that weren't to be expected because there's more common species. The large marble was one of those. And so, this is again just indicating that, in that part, you see here information from iNaturalist that shows, there are people that are seeing it, which is wonderful. Here's information from another butterfly site that tracks both the historic and current. So, we luckily have, observations that are still occurring here, which is important to track. However, the broader information is saying with this large marble, that's something, if we're not being careful about how we take care of these areas around us, we may no longer see this particular butterfly, which is to be a pretty incredibly beautiful butterfly to be able to see. That would be quite sad to have that happen. So we have a lot of staff work to help bring information, help kind of think about things like the monarch and the large marble. But we also have a lot of community science because we can magnify our by getting engaged with thousands of people that are interested in trying to learn about, but also to turn that learning into information that helps us, better understand, the presence, the needs of our pollinators around us. So we have a community science project like the Bumblebee Atlas, which is pretty exciting. We have now several different atlases going across the US, and this is basically groups of volunteers who go out to a specific area and through some very specific procedures, actually go look for bumblebees, if need be, capture them, take photographs of them so we can be, make sure the identification gets cataloged correctly, and I also ideally connect what flowers they are being seen upon, so we can match up which flowers, which habitats are kind of necessary for them, and compile all that information so we can better understand and continue to track the status of the different bumblebees that we have around the US. Right now, this is just a graph of the different areas we have atlases going, which is pretty important. I am hopeful that we'll be able to fill in at some point another atlas here. That may be an opportunity for any of you that are interested in the future here to get engaged. If you like to kind of get out in the field and look for bumblebees, that being, volunteering for atlas would be a great opportunity. So we'll keep tabs. Maybe in the next couple of years, we can get an atlas going in the Rocky Mountain, which is great. But the reality of these kind of community science efforts is it really, again, magnifies what we can learn and know and track about our pollinators. So here's just an example of one of the community science pieces we have. It's just an application. You can get it downloaded on your phone called Bumblebee Watch. So if you're just out and about, you see a bumblebee, you can snap a photo of it, the Bumblebee Watch, you can submit it, and that tracks the presence of that particular bumblebee, because we have staff that know bumblebees, looks at that photo, and hopefully, the best they can from a photo, can identify and track it, and then catalog it with all these other sightings that happen across the US. Well, that's good, gives us a good baseline of information, but these atlases are really kind of more of a dedicated effort. And what I like that comparison there is just how those atlases can help them magnify the information we collect, and then empower that information to be able to say, again, what habitats are they occurring in, where are they not, what's the difference, what plants are they associated with. And this graph also just kind of shows the same thing as the map is showing, is that thanks to the atlas efforts, is that kind of the more passive Bumblebee Watch, while it's collecting good information, it's still, the more you can collect, the more meaningful it is. And so through these atlas efforts, we're able to really kind of substantially increase what we're learning and what we can know. And so atlas efforts, community science efforts, are very powerful ways we can all contribute to learning more and helping to conserve our variety of pollinators, but it's certainly important firefly atlases. So we have many of those happening in areas where fireflies are pretty rare. We also have the opportunity to participate that in the pathway if you were able to go out and take a picture of a firefly. We do have some in Colorado that, you know, you can share that information. It helps, again, collect the body of information on what fireflies are occurring in different areas. We have the ability to track information about what, where they are, where they're associated with different milkweeds, so you can kind of track observations of monarch and whenever they're being found on milkweed. We have account information that you can participate here in Colorado. If you go out to California, you can. And then, you know, we partner also with a lot of other organizations like the Monarch Health Project, Great Sunflower Project, all these different community science efforts. There's a lot of other local efforts too this year. All are pretty important in that area and helpful ways to collect information. So science is important, and turning that science into information that helps shape, you know, us creating policies or, you know, providing support to doing things that help the environment around us, habitat around us, the pollinators, all important. So we do have, you know, kind of staff that are dedicated to, you know, addressing advocacy issues. Sometimes that's related to pesticide issues. Sometimes that's strengthening environmental regulations. It can also be advocating for the listing of certain species because of some of the work we do, and others to say, okay, wait a minute, this particular pollinator or an invertebrate is on the threat list, and we need to put the petition that it should be listed as an endangered species, whether that's threatened or endangered. So all very important. Another recent effort that is really being engaged with by Xerces and other organizations, and oftentimes within many states, they don't recognize invertebrates, pollinators as wildlife. So like here in Colorado, we have our Parks and Wildlife, they have jurisdiction over many of our vertebrates, you know, in fact, a lot of, you know, mollusks and other, you know, organisms, but they don't actually have authority to manage insects or provide programs of protections to insects. So the endangered or threatened insects we have in the state are protected federally, but there's no state level protections there, or no levels of kind of, you know, authority to say what we need to know more to really develop programs. So there's work afoot within a number of different states. Nevada recently is one that has gone forward and approved within that state that insects should be considered, certain cadres of insects should be considered as wildlife. So they have statutory authority, and the state has the ability to support them. That also helps channel a lot of federal funds. And also in the kind of in the bottom line, helps to prevent species from being listed. So it helps you recognize what you can do within a state or how you can employ resources to, you know, both learn and then take action to, you know, hopefully do things that will prevent a species from continuing to be extirpated from the areas or, you know, certainly afraid of that and then be listed. So I mentioned that, again, a lot of our advocacy around pesticide reduction, but it's not just advocacy, it's bringing, again, information to bear. So what are some of the practices we can use as alternative to pesticides? So we can still address some of the concerns that the pesticides are trying to address, whether that's, you know, trying to reduce the presence of, you know, weed species or problem species, whether that's plants or insects. Are there other approaches we can take? We have a pesticide team trying to bring information to bear about, you know, the concerns and issues of pesticides, but also are there ways that we can help manage our farms, our ranch lands, and our spaces around us, and our urban areas to try to use alternatives to pesticides where we can. So that's important work. Yeah, community engagement work again, as I mentioned earlier, you can't do this alone. So building, you know, movements around getting people engaged, getting communities engaged. I mentioned one of the things I'm responsible for is helping the city of Boulder develop pathways through Boulder itself for, you know, pollinator corridors, gardens that have a lot of native plants. Denver's doing similar work. So any way we can get engaged in other communities, and we'd love to see efforts here, even the Estes Valley would be wonderful to have ways that we can think about the little work that we do to connect with others. So, you know, community engagement is incredibly important to us. And building capacity. So doing things like this talk or doing seminars and workshops, getting knowledge kind of distributed out about what can be done is incredibly valuable as well. So it's all kind of work behind what Xerces does. But again, it doesn't matter what's actually happening on the ground. It's great to do a talk, but it's even better to take that information and do something on the ground. So habitat creation is one of those things that, I think is really the excitement of my work is it can be done at a big scale. And sometimes that's just not less about creation, it's more about protection. It can happen at that small scale. What can an individual that makes a difference in space they may have access to? Maybe that's your own space around a house. Maybe that's a community space. Maybe that's, something you can find a space within a school, a church, a community center. There are always opportunities to make a difference in spaces. Some of the work we do certainly is working with farmers and ranchers to look at the opportunities within the working lands we have. How do we try to move away from more of an intensive monocultural of agriculture to very diversified agriculture, regenerative agricultural techniques? How do you integrate hedgerows and areas? Think about the opportunities to cover crops, leave natural spaces within our working plants, and try to integrate a lot more native plants, and also some of the plants that may be beneficial for hosting many of the predators that will help, take care of some of your pests, or many of the practices there. We're also active in thinking about, there's a lot of spaces we often don't think about as being habitat. It's really important, and that's our roadways. These are these connected corridors, and that's similar to where sometimes our street corridor, but there's space, continuous space, that can actually serve more habitat benefits, especially for invertebrates. They don't need oftentimes a lot of space. So we're pretty active in creating guidelines, working with a lot of transportation to say there's a lot of space in our roadways, along the roadways, that can be beneficial for invertebrates. So how do we manage them, both so that they use the roadway kind of needs, but actually some of that space that's off the roadway can be incredibly important and actually rich habitat for a lot of invertebrates as well. So taking action, coming back to what can you do? Well, I think one of the important things is the space around you is thinking about how you can, find space that you enjoy, but maybe make it successful or better habitat for some of these little creatures that are incredibly important to us. Sometimes that's just taking a different look at how you utilize the space around us. Conversion of turf. Grass, there may be a function for it. A lot of times, it may not be serving a whole lot of benefit, yet uses a lot of resources, uses a lot of water, may need a lot of fertilizers to it. If there's opportunities to reduce the extent of the turf and replace that with, other plants, native plants, grasses, or add a few wildflowers into it, you actually can make a lot better use of that space. Requires less water typically, requires oftentimes less, supplementary resources to help that be a right thing. But think about, again, what can we do sometimes with the spaces we have that, might actually turn something that, looks nice, maybe, or you think it looks nice, but you can actually make it even more beautiful, like turning it into something that's a little more diverse, because maybe it mixes the native plants in it, and actually then becomes very viable habitat too for some of the pollinators around us. So if we want to do that, how do we go about, converting a little bit of the space? And probably one of the most important things about that is, is thinking about adding native plants into the space around us. Natives kind of are key because they are this kind of the relationship that has been developed between many of our pollinators. It's that relationship between the flowering plant and an insect that eat either pollen, nectar, perhaps both from that flower and that plant. But in kind of gathering that, it's also doing the plant a service by transferring the pollen to another plant, so that plant can generate a new seed and follow up with creating a new next generation of plants. And many of those relationships have co-evolved over time. We talked about way at the beginning, golden banner. It's kind of developed so that it's not wide open to be pollinated by anything. It needs a specific bumblebee, or not bumblebee, it needs bumblebees to be able to pollinate it. The reason it's doing that is it wants to make sure, if someone is grabbing in pollen, it has a higher chance of going to another similar golden banner, not being brought on some aster out there or some rose. It rather wants to make sure that we're gonna pollinator is gonna pay off by taking it to another, golden banner. So if it kind of creates a tighter relationship, it has more ability to be successful in its pollen going over to the same species of plants, to be able to be successful in developing into a team. So those relationships kind of develop over time, and that makes them incredibly important. They're also, in terms of natives, well adapted already to our conditions here in Colorado. A lot of times we bring in plants, species that, you know, maybe have been grown in other areas or cultivated for other climates. They don't do so well. We bring them into our higher elevations or into our drier Colorado climate, you know, they struggle. Our natives, they've been here. They are well adapted, so they don't need supplemental water as much. Sometimes they need a little water to get established, but usually that's just through the first, you know, couple of growing seasons. Beyond that, they're usually self-sufficient. You know, they also already have kind of those relationships with many of the pollinators, but also the other predatory beneficial insects as well. So they kind of fit into the natural feed, so they don't usually have any pest problems associated with them, because already, you know, the life of invertebrates around us are well situated for that plant to help it thrive. So, you know, if you're thinking about how do I make a difference in the space around me, think about native plants integrating, and they kind of return both the beauty, kind of the diversity, but actually it can be, you know, a resource saving part of our system. But then also think about, okay, what can I do those native plants to think about the life cycle and the range of different pollinators we have. And part of that is saying, well, let's make sure we have native plants that are in bloom throughout the season. So early spring to late fall. And the spring is when all the queen bumblebees come out. So they're very dependent on having a flush of flowers so that they can kind of initially build spring, start creating a brood so that they're actually going to have a successful, you know, hive to be able to, hopefully at the end of the year, set forth a new set of queens that will kind of overwinter and start the following generation, following year. So think about when you're planting natives, to think about plants that are going to be blooming throughout the whole season. What plants, willows, great, you know, tree or shrub to have available because of the early spring bloom. Great for many kind of early species bees. You know, think about then those later spring, early summer flowers. The penstemon is a great example there. Think about then kind of what's going to hang in there during the heat of July, late July, August. Gumweed, you know, is one of the popular ones. I know it's a little sticky and not always fun to, you know, the smell, but it's a wonderful pollinator plant. So, and it kind of hangs in there when it gets a little brutal out in temperature wise. So think about those asters, those are plants that are hanging in there well through the heat of summer. And then the late season ones that kind of tag along, maybe even make it into November and bloom, because there are going to be, you know, certain generations, maybe those late queens that just need a little extra bump before they go down in the burrow or find their kind of ground habitat to be able to overwinter. So they're going to need that, you know, kind of last minute bloom to make sure they have the adequate pollen and nectar resources. Just driving up here, I'm always excited when I see the rapid brush all in bloom, because that I know is kind of keeping those late season pollinators active and kind of well nourished. So make sure you have blooms that kind of go throughout the season, but then also diversify the types of plants you have as well. Because again, those relationships, you know, matter. And so whether it's something like milkweed, and we know the relationship already well with monarchs and milkweed, but there's a lot of other butterflies and pollinators that are, you know, take advantage and benefit from things like milkweeds. To small plants like the peeping primroses come out at night. Think about moths and other flies that may be active at times that we know always kind of active out in our system. But there's still important pollinators out there. Sunflowers, asters, think about kind of the broad, big flowers, like, you know, good for the longhorn bees or bumblebees. And then the rose family, too, a great family to include in our variety of plants. So think about having blooms that go out through the season. Think about a bunch of different types of flowers. Don't get kind of caught too much into one specific flower. And then you provide that, and you'll start having some diversity. And then also think about and understand and start learning about, well, there are certain, you know, certainly butterflies that have relationships because their caterpillars eat certain plants, certain host plants to be able to thrive. So if you can plant specific plants within your mix of what you're kind of increasing your native diversity around, you have a better chance of actually supporting the full life cycle of some of our pollinators. So things like the blue granite grass, great for some of our little small butterflies, the skippers. So it's their host plants. So add in a little bit of our native grasses, you're probably supporting, some of our butterflies for their caterpillar stage. And then you have other flowers available for their, and they need nectar. To be able to be on wing. Buckwheats are sulfur flowers, a great flower, but also really important for some of our native blue butterflies. So their categories feed on that. So buckwheats, the sulfur flowers, incredibly important, and never go wrong with milkweed. Just for the chance we do have monarchs coming through, let alone there are other butterflies. I don't know on that. So when you're thinking about, again, got a bunch of different native plants you're putting in, you want to be thinking too about where is that plant going to best survive given the site conditions you're going to be putting it in. So think about, the sun exposure, what's the soil conditions, and also the moisture levels. So even within native plants, they can do well, but they have their preferences. So you want to be thinking about your site and how you place those native plants. Understand a little bit about, do they need full sun or are they a bit more shade tolerant? There can be a little bit of gradient of moisture tolerances to them as well. So try to plan out your place a little bit. And no matter what, even if we think we do our best about thinking about it, plants sometimes too know where they need to find their own niches and they'll move around a little bit on you. And that's okay too, because they probably are trying to find the best spot, even when the spaces you're trying to build your own garden with. Healthy soils, can't be stated strongly enough that you're starting with, good soil is usually really important. Although that's also a benefit from our natives, is they are good with our local soil conditions. You don't have to overly prepare soils for our native plants. You want to make sure there's some quality conditions to hold in moisture. So you're thinking about things like mulches, rock mulches, good quality wood mulch to help protect that moisture or the moisture and allow some nutrient values within the soil and have a thriving soil. But you're going to have to overly prepare it or constantly have fertilizers that will meet the natives won't require. Again, we have information that helps pull some of this what I've kind of quickly covered and give you some examples of types of plants that do well here in the Rocky Mountains and the different pollinators that are dependent on the plants. This actual Rocky Mountain plant list, there's copies of it available. I put it over on the table here. You're welcome to have it. That's also available on our website. So it's I think a good guide. There's also a lot of good information from organizations like the Colorado Native Plant Society and others about different types of native plants. All that information, again, can hopefully help give you some guides of what might work well in your space and also what might work well with the pollinators. So the plants matter, but also there's other things we can do in our spaces that are just as important because we've got to think about the full life cycle of our pollinators, that they may be active on wing for when it's nice outside, that they've got kind of the brutal winters to make it through as well, where they have space that they need to make sure they're raising their young and that are well protected. So thinking about the other kind of habitat needs are just as important as thinking about the forage needs of pollinators. So over 70% of our bees actually live in the ground. We don't think about that, but they're solitary, they live in our ground. So in our spaces, having some opportunity for bare ground where you can, especially if it has a little bit more sandy value to it, is incredibly important. There's a lot of ground that's can be bees that need a little bit of space, not covering everything with fabric, rock, or hard surfaces is actually going to allow these solitary bees spaces to make sure they have, a hole in the ground that they can nest in as well as over winter. Thinking about not always cleaning up our gardens, all the leaves and needles out of our spaces, that thatch on the ground, the leaves, the needles, the stems, all become important from just a structure to be able to protect, insects that are going to use that as cover over the winter. And some of those stems actually become incredibly important too, as the nesting site for some of our solitary bees. Thinking about where you can, I understand we always have to manage our fire risk as well in terms of, managing, what sort of down woody materials we leave underground, but where you can at times safely leave, wood on the ground, sticks, that becomes incredibly important as well for insects. Bumblebees will use piles of sticks, for nesting as well as kind of the thatch where they'll use holes in the ground. So thinking about kind of the whole relationship of what we leave is important. Yeah.
I've seen those bee houses for sale, do those work? Do you think they have value?
They work, and I think they can have value. The challenge a little bit is that every time we kind of put one of those out, we're also kind of creating a congested area for bees that oftentimes won't live in that congested of a setting. And I say that because that sometimes increases the risk for concentrating disease as well. So if there's no other resources available, yes. If you can provide other resources, like, you have wood nearby, there's, stems, that's probably a better resource for that. Okay, and if you do provide the house, the other thing I would say is, it's one of those things you want to be kind of active, because just leaving it out again, year after year after year, increases the risk that those houses then actually have, fungus associated with them or diseases that you're attracting a bee into a resource only to, kind of threaten its success. So you may need to go through processes of actually kind of cleaning out or sterilizing those houses so that they can continue to be used in a safe way. Many of those things. So they can be a benefit, providing a natural habitat is always preference. But if you don't have any other opportunity, whatever you can do oftentimes is better than nothing at all. So thanks, Anne, for the question. So, that is a picture here of just bamboo, so a little bamboo house, an example there. So, thinking about native bees, we mentioned that most of them are living in the grounds, want to make sure we have ground space. Another 30% are actually living in some sort of stem. So thinking about, how we provide stem resources for them. We have nesting and overwintering habitat information. I have a few of those sheets out here as well. That's actually one of my favorite guides because it just gives you some tools and some things to think about. How do you take care of the pollinators, the bees, kind of the rest of the year? Things that you don't often think about. And just as a simple example is oftentimes, at the end of the growing season, we come in and clip all of the dead stems out of our gardens. Well, actually, we're removing many of the potential next year homes, or could be removing, where bees, a solitary bee is actually laid its next season brood in that stem. So cutting, actually, ideally leave the flower head on because it still may have some seeds that are available for the birds and so forth that feed them over winter. But after you kind of left the stem on, maybe early January or February, go off and cut the flower head off. Leave that stem too, because over the coming season, that stem is going to be potentially, especially if it's a pithy stem, will become available for some of our tunnel nest bees to be able to either crawl in or carve out if they need to the pit to be able to raise a brood in. So, and part of that kind of guidance and such is all part of the information you can get from our website or that nesting brochure that I talked about. So, thinking about how do we increase the habitat around us, think about the full life cycle, what kind of other, resources will pollinators need. We can start making some of these differences. And if you take kind of a bee's view, even when we start doing that in the spaces, even a little bit more of our urbanized spaces, it can make a difference. So maybe you're planting a few fruit trees in an area. You got your vegetable garden. Within your vegetable garden, you're getting a few vegetables go to flower. That's creating some habitat for pollinators. You're adding in some flowering shrubs, especially some of those spring flowering shrubs. The bumblebees have and to be able to, nectar on as soon as you gather pollen on it, as soon as they come out. You're leaving a little bit of bare ground. All these little pockets of resources, they don't have to be connected for insects. Insects meaning they don't have to be contiguous space, but ideally if they're somewhat scattered but close enough, you can create a pathway of habitat through an urban area that becomes viable habitat for many of our pollinators. I just like this graphic because it kind of really illustrates that those little things we can do in the spaces around it suddenly become important because it can create a lot of space for our pollinators. And then once you've created the space, it's also important to start sharing, communicating why you're creating that space and the value of it. So think about what you can do to communicate with those around you, that what you're doing here is purposeful and meaningful and makes a benefit. And maybe, again, you can spur others to take similar action. And part of that too is to think about how we can try to reduce some of the threats directly. So put a lot of work into space for pollinators. We can undercut a lot of that too, by then putting in substances or poisons that are only going to make those spaces threatening to our pollinators. So think about where you're purchasing plants from, especially if you're looking for native plants or even not, you know. Try to offer, find, sources of plants that have had, you know, no exposure to neonics, and or other flies that have grown with, you know, minimal exposure to other pesticides or herbicides. For a propagation process. So I thought kind of a cursory bit about a lot that there is to know. Again, this is just a quick, you know, slide to say, Xerces has information that's gonna help you. So, you know, go to our website, we have links to many of this information, it's all free for download. And so it can help you both, you know, if you wanna invest in something with a lot more information, one stop with a book, or just individual, you know, guides or pamphlets about how to take care of it. Even something with how once you're starting to grow some native plants, how you collect seeds, and you don't have to worry about buy plants, because you can start growing your own from collecting seeds. So many of the ways that'll help you start that path. And from our website too, you know, we have a full pollinator resource center, and it's regionally based. So you can go to our website, go to the pollinator center, and then, you know, the challenge is Colorado, you get split in a bunch of different ways. So, you know, it's a reality, we're a pretty diverse state, but bottom line is that, you know, go to Colorado, I would go to the Great Plains, and or the Great Basin to get information that from our site that will kind of be relative to Colorado. And you can kind of pick and choose what you do back here. So with that, you kind of start making a difference. And then, you know, then if you start working as communities, you can even make a greater difference. We have programs within Xerces that support the city and bee campus. So, you know, communities can get together with their municipal governments and get sponsored in the city and do commitments to creating habitat, reducing the use of pesticides, creating IPM plans, all these things that programs that can be engaged with by community members that really make a difference. And then also we have programs like Bee Better Certified, so that there are products that you can actually purchase, you know, with the Bee Certified recognition one that have been third-party checked to make sure that the practices that a farmer or ranchers utilizing to produce our food is done in a way that is certainly considered a pollinator's done or ecological way of pollinator. So whether it's the actions we take, what we buy, how we spend our money, how we dedicate our time, and the difference we can make in the space around us, you know, you can make a difference. So we're here as Xerces, an organization to help support that. There's a lot that we can do, but we can't do it all, and we really need your help. So making a difference, you know, doing kind of whatever you can at your own level is important, and it does matter. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, join in, help out. You know, those bees, the butterflies, flies, beetles, they're all really incredibly important. Hopefully you get a little glimpse of that today. But you can, you know, you can do stuff that will make a difference. Maybe help bend those curves a little bit to maybe make sure that our future generations have the ability to enjoy the richness of the plants and the pollinators that we see today. So with that, I say thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah.
Thanks, that was great. For butterflies, do each species of butterfly like look for a particular flower, or are they just, you know, a wide range of flowers?
They eat anything. It's both. So that's the cheap answer. Is it ranges, just like there are, like within the bees, most invertebrates, there are groups that are very kind of specialist oriented. They may require very specific plants or habitats. Some are more generalist. You know, they found different ways to survive over time. Butterflies are kind of the same way. There are specific butterflies that have very narrow niches. They have a single plant that caterpillar needs to feed on. And so that's the only plant that they'll be successful on. Others are kind of a little more generalist. Their caterpillars are able to survive on a number of different plants. So you think about a painted lady, you know, it's a pretty universal generalist butterfly. Its larvae can feed on a lot of different things, from nettles to thistles to, you know, kind of it's been successful in colonizing a lot of areas just because it's able to kind of support itself on a lot of plants. I mentioned that large marble. It needs specific musters to be able to survive on. Many of our small skippers require single type of grass to be able to survive on. So it does vary a little bit. oftentimes kind of the rare species and some of the butterflies that are most at risk are the ones that have kind of that very tight tolerance to only a specific plant. Sometimes that's a specific plant species or subspecies that occurs in a specific area, because it's learned how to kind of utilize, some of the chemicals within the plant, especially some of the plants are trying to defend themselves, so they develop certain chemical, toxins to them. Well, the caterpillars are able to manage those toxins. So it works well if you fire that plant, and you give it another plant or a similar plant that doesn't have the same exact chemical nature of the toxin, and it can't do it.
Do the larvae, sort of the plants that the larvae need, are the same that then the winged butterfly also needs?
No,
It can be separate.
it can be very different, yeah. So like the little blue butterflies, the ones that usually feed on our sulfur flowers, they'll caterpillars will be on the sulfur flower, but that adult butterfly may feed on the sulfur flower, but also can feed on a variety of other flowers as well. So not always the kind of the flowers can usually be a little bit different. Not always, but usually.
So around here, I can think of two non-native flowers, the musk thistle and the Dalmatian toadflax. That both attract a lot of pollinators.
Yeah.
But the question is, certainly with the toadflax, like you can't get rid of it without some pesticide. So where do you fall on that spectrum?
It's a tough one. Couple things. One is, the reality is we've shifted our landscapes a lot, and we've created space, and plants have moved in and invaded, which provide, pollen and nectar resources for a lot of our, our pollinators. And that's certainly of importance, and we gotta be thoughtful around that. I still think where we want to be is trying to minimize some of these problem plants, but we also just can't remove those plants without trying to supplement what's being lost, because we're taking away food sources for many of our pollinators. So if we're doing some, I think it's important to reduce the amount of invasive plants like our musk thistles or toadflax, but think about what again we can do to restore and provide other flowering plants in their place that help to support forage needs of our butterfly. The point of then using herbicides to manage, it's one of those. I take the position, you can't always say no, because you have to think about what your greater good is. It is always first of how can I minimize and what can I do to reduce that risk and kind of target that application if the application needs, and again, sometimes the reality is the extent of what we're trying to deal with for restoring an area or remove a problem is maybe beyond the resources we have, and that's, that may be a tool you have in your toolbox. Use it carefully. I kind of deal with that. I've got 8 acres that I try to manage, and it's frustrating. I'm all trying to deal with Canadian thistle, bindweed, cheatgrass, and I only have so much time and energy to deal with that. I do my best to not use pesticides or herbicides on it, and that's my goal. But there are times when I may have to think about that being a possibility in my toolbox. So it's always trying to do as much as you can to minimize, avoid it if you can. If you can't, then, try to target it. Be as careful in your application because it has, long-term effects. If that helps, then it's a true struggle. So.
Just had a big thank you from online, and then one question. Has there been any progress in banning the new chemical that is so deadly for bees? She couldn't remember the name of the spray.
I'm not sure I can answer that without kind of knowing more specifically. I know there's a number, there's multiple challenges. One is part of, certainly with many of our chemical manufacturers, they certainly have, a lot of influence on keeping certain things at market. I think that PPA is certainly an important entity for being able to understand the risks, but also they only have so many tools. Many times when they assess the potency of certain herbicides or poisons towards insects, it's done with honeybees as kind of a surrogate. That may or may not be a very good surrogate for many of our native pollinators. years. So, there's limited tools. So I think, you're welcome to get in touch with me through my website. I'm available. Go to the Xerces website, you can find my contact information. If they can tell me the chemical, I can probably put them in touch with staff and they have more information specifically to the pesticide or herbicide.
There's another question down there.
So you're familiar with up here, so you know about, we have deer and we have bulls and whatever ground bulls. If you had 3 plants that you would recommend, what would they be?
Boy. Always for me, one of my favorites, no matter what, and again, I can't say specifically to the deer and the bull and kind of how to best protect them. I love Monarda. Wordsmiths, I think that's a great one that I always kind of enjoy. There's a number of different asters, but if you can plant an aster, you gotta be careful.
The asters, so
There's smooth aster, which
Yeah.
does pretty well, but that's when you gotta be careful of, because it will do very well and take over. But there's a couple other kind of asters into that, that might be really good. So that would be another one that I would look at. Yeah, I mean, if you can do milkweed, that's always great. I know up here it does well, but that may be something you may want to be careful about too.
okay, good.
Okay. The other one is always, if you can look at something in the sunflower.
Okay.
Well, sunflowers are, there's a number of different sunflowers out here that are great as well. They're great. They can be a little more resistant to some of the pressures. They grow well, and then they're great, pollinator plants.
Thanks.
You bet.
One more question.
Yes, you were mentioning milkweed. I live on a property that has a little over 3 acres. And I looked one day at a little tiny bag of milkweed seed and it was extremely expensive. Do you have any sources where we could buy larger quantities and be able to plant?
You might check in, there's a couple different organizations you can purchase seeds through. There's Western Native Seed, which is one company that you can often get high quality native seeds from. If you go also to our website, our Pollinator Center,
Okay,
there's a link through there too, which has a list of native plant seed providers. So that can link you in with some of our native seed producers. There's Pawnee Butte Seeds, which usually have to buy a larger quantity. They're outside of Greeley. They provide native seeds. I know there's a couple other, I think it's not Granite, but there's a couple other seed companies that you can often purchase seeds. And I think it's one of those things to be careful about too, is try to get, again, seed companies that are ideally providing natives that are more regionally oriented. So, we know they're gonna do well in our region rather than kind of milkweed or, another, what might be a native plant, but it's actually something that's more prominent out on the west coast or the east coast.
and those are, that information's available on your website?
Yep, you go to our website, and then there'll be a link to Pollinator program, and it'll take you to our pollinator regions, kind of that map, and from that map, you can link to any sort of information that will kind of be.
Yeah, we need to be elevation minded here too.
Yeah, exactly. That's why the Rocky Mountain plant list is a good one, because that's thinking about kind of
Okay.
what does well, kind of.
Well, thank you so much. That was really good.
Thank you.